Will they confirm that we will get absolutely the meaningful vote tomorrow and it won't be delayed yet again? And, as I said, the vote to rule out no deal on the 13th and vote to extend Article 50 on the 14th as promised? And will the Minister confirm that if the deal is rejected again tomorrow, whether the Prime Minister will shift her red lines and show not just that she's willing to meet with members of this House, but she's willing to compromise with them as well? This chaos, Mr. Speaker, cannot go on much longer. The fate of people's workplaces and jobs and businesses is at stake the longer this government fails to negotiate and simply dither after dither after dither and then further delay. It's time for answers.
The right honourable gentleman talks about further delay. I have confirmed to him that there will be a meaningful vote in this House tomorrow. I have explained that negotiations are ongoing and the government is seeking legally binding changes which would address the concerns that have been raised by this House. But the right honourable gentleman speaks about chaos, and we all remember his advice to the government on day one after a referendum to trigger Article 50 immediately. I think we can be very clear that in his hands this process would be no safe. He talks about investment, and he and his party will have the opportunity to vote to secure investment and unlock investment tomorrow by backing the deal. They will do so fully informed on the government's legal analysis, and he asked about the timetable for publishing the Attorney General's advice. I can confirm to him that that advice will be published before this House sits tomorrow.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend firmly confirmed that the vote on the deal will come tomorrow. He didn't actually mention the event, if it's defeated, of the vote on Wednesday on whether or not we leave with no deal, and further to that, the vote on Thursday about delaying Article 50 if indeed this House rejects no deal. I hope it's a mere oversight and he's not going back on last week's undertakings.
Well, I'm very happy to confirm to my right honourable and learned friend the exact words of the Prime Minister in making that undertaking, which we absolutely stand by, which is that first we will hold a meaningful vote on the 12th of March. If the government has not won a meaningful vote, it will table a motion to be voted on by Wednesday the 13th of March, asking this House if it supports leaving the EU without a withdrawal agreement. Thirdly, if the House rejects both of these options, the government will on 14th of March bring forward a motion on whether Parliament wants to see a short, limited extension to Article 50.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is crucial that this House has the opportunity to extend Article 50 on Thursday, because we have to take back control from the shambles of a government. We are 18 days away from the scheduled UK exit from the EU. 18 days, and yet this government still has no plan to protect jobs and living standards. The Prime Minister is guilty of neglect. She's proven incapable of governance, incapable of negotiation, and utterly incapable of leadership. The truth is, the politics of the United Kingdom has become a farce. The lack of leadership from the Tory and the Labour parties has left people across the United Kingdom at a loss, panicking about their futures, abandoned by their so-called leaders. Mr. Speaker, this morning Downing Street exclaims that tomorrow's vote will go ahead. That's been repeated by the Minister. That must happen. It is welcome, because to dither and delay it yet again would be another act of grave cowardice. We cannot ignore the facts. Mr. Speaker, this place is in total chaos. The crisis engulfing the United Kingdom is deepening. In Scotland, businesses, students, farmers, academics, mothers, farmers, EU nationals are rightly worried about their futures. But this government, this Tory party, this Prime Minister couldn't care less about the people of Scotland. This deal will damage our economy, destroy growth and deprive Scottish people of all the cherished opportunities the European Union has gifted us. Michel Barnier was very clear. The negotiations are over. He said we talked all weekend, and now the discussions and negotiations are between the government in London and the Parliament in London. So can the Minister tell us, Is the government backing the Prime Minister's deal tomorrow? Will the text of the motion we vote on have a new arrangement on the Northern Ireland backstop? Has the Prime Minister negotiated with the European Union new protections for the Scottish economy? And if not, are the Scottish MPs and her party ready to resign? Scotland did not vote for Brexit, and we must not be dragged out of the European Union against our will. The sovereign right of the Scottish people to choose our own future must be respected. We are and we will remain a European nation.
Minister!
Well, of course it is true that all of us, we are leaving the European Union, but we are not leaving Europe. And I'd say to the right honourable gentleman that amidst his rhetoric, he spoke about the interests of the Scottish people. Of course, the interests of the Scottish people are in our strong union of the United Kingdom. We want to deliver a good deal for the whole United Kingdom.
Mr. David Davis.
Unlike the Leader of the Opposition, can I welcome the Minister to the dispatch box? I know from my own experience that, unlike the Leader of the Opposition, he is a brilliant master of his brief. There was also talk from the Leader of the Opposition about trust. Is the Prime Minister not demonstrating the trust this House should put in her by going to Europe and negotiating with the Europeans a deal which will deliver on the requirements of the British people, unlike the Opposition?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to his work on this process. But also he has said many times that often these negotiations with the EU go right to the 11th hour. I think we have a demonstration in that today, and of course there will be a statement from the government later on today.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister explain to the House why the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said apparently earlier today, and I quote, "The Prime Minister is travelling to Strasbourg this evening to try to finalise an agreement, if that's possible, to be able to put that to a meaningful vote in Westminster tomorrow." Can he confirm that? And if an agreement that changes the withdrawal agreement or the political declaration is reached tonight, will that have the approval of the heads of government? And if not, will it actually constitute a negotiated agreement under the terms of Section 13(1)(b) of the EU Withdrawal Act?
Minister.
Right honourable gentleman, the chair of the Select Committee, asked me a series of questions which he knows, I think, that I can't answer all of them. But what I would say to him is that my Secretary of State reiterated to me that he is keen to give evidence to the right honourable gentleman's committee tomorrow, where perhaps he can update the right honourable gentleman and his committee on all of these issues.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Likewise, can I welcome the Minister, who was an excellent PPS before his well-deserved promotion. My demotion. There we are. Hasn't the member for Leeds Central just shown exactly what the Leader of the Opposition should have done in a statement or an urgent question entitled EU Withdrawal Agreement Legal Changes? Because isn't the nub of this matter actually better served by having a forensic examination of the January letter from Presidents Tusk and Juncker, where much has already been conceded by the EU, and what is now needed is for that to be turned into legally binding text? And doesn't the Minister agree that for all those who complain about delay and dither and consequence of the workplace, all of that could be solved if the agreement was passed tomorrow?
My right honourable friend makes a very good point. Of course, we should be making sure that we pass this agreement, but it's vital that the Prime Minister has gone in to negotiate right up until the last moment to make sure that she can address the concerns of this House. I agree with her that the letter from the President took some steps to address those concerns, but what we've been seeking and what we will continue to seek are legally binding changes.
Yvette Cooper.
The Minister could not answer the question from my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central. And the reason it matters what status the meaningful vote has tomorrow is we want to be sure that the government is not going to use any shenanigans to avoid any further votes later in the week. So can he just confirm, if Parliament has not approved a withdrawal agreement and future partnership that has been agreed with the EU for the purposes of 13(1)(b) of the EU Withdrawal Act by the end of tomorrow, then on Wednesday they will go ahead with the vote on no deal, followed by the vote on extension of Article 50.
I'd say, I've already confirmed that in repeating the Prime Minister's assurance, and we do accept that the Section 31 of the Withdrawal Act is binding.
Patrick McLaughlin.
Should the country leave the European Union without a deal, what will be the liabilities owed to the European Union?
Minister.
My right honourable friend asks a very interesting question. Of course, there are a range of different views of that. The House of Lords Committee has taken one view, other honourable and right honourable gentlemen will take others.
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman was asking for that of the minister. Sort of clues in the nature of the exchange. Honourable member or right honourable member gets up and asks a question. He's interested in the view of the minister, not of some other committee in some other place. I thought that was fairly straightforward, but there you go. Tom Brake.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister says he doesn't engage in speculation. Could I encourage him perhaps to make an educated guess? If the Prime Minister's deal is passed tomorrow, how many more years of very public Tory bickering will the country face as the UK seeks to establish its new relationship with the European Union?
The honourable gentleman asked a question about if the deal is passed. I think he should get behind the deal and support it, because we would then secure the implementation period, which would provide the certainty to businesses and citizens in this country whilst we negotiate the future relationship and make sure that is put in place. And certainly my aspiration to make sure that that is done before the end of the implementation period.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
The European Union has known for some considerable time that we're going to have this vital vote tomorrow. Supposing they do actually offer to pull some rabbit out of the hat sometime late tonight, what does this say about the bad faith in which they've been negotiating?
Minister.
I have to say to my honourable friend, it's our determination to progress in negotiations in good faith. We have done so throughout, and I'm sure the European Union will want to show its good faith by meeting the concerns of this House.
Ben Bradshaw.
Will he acknowledge that to make an amendment tomorrow that the government supports, making support for it conditional on an as yet not negotiated agreement, would not fulfil either the letter or the law of the Prime Minister's promise?
I think the right honourable gentleman should await developments later on today and see what the government puts forward tomorrow. But what I have been very clear on is that we absolutely stand by the commitments of the Prime Minister on the meaningful vote and on what follows.
Mr. Ann Patterson.
Speaker, can I welcome my honourable friend to the dispatch box and congratulate him and his colleagues for getting the European Union to agree to set up a task force or a work stream to work up the Malthouse compromise proposals. Can he commit to getting those into the legally binding text so there will be an implementation date which is fixed for the future?
Well, I say to my right honourable friend, who I know speaks with considerable experience of these issues, that the alternative arrangements have been a crucial part of this conversation, that they will continue to be a very important part of our negotiations, and of course we are seeking legally binding changes.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he care at all about the real impact on real people of his government's utter incompetence? In my Brighton constituency, American Express, the biggest private sector employer, is deeply concerned about recruitment problems because of his recklessness. So can he answer a very simple question? Will he himself vote against no deal if the Prime Minister's deal is lost tomorrow?
Well, I would say to the honourable lady, I want to take the first opportunity to vote against no deal by voting for the deal in a meaningful vote. That is the best way to secure the absence of no deal and to secure the interests of this country.
Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister, who has arrived at the big time and is doing well, has told the House that the Attorney General will publish any revised legal advice before the House sits tomorrow, which I'm sure the whole House will welcome for obvious reasons. With regard to the motion, which we may then have to vote on, will we get sight of that tonight, or will it only be in the public domain when the order paper is published electronically in the small hours of this morning?
My right honourable friend asked an important question. I would say that the government will bring forward its motion as soon as we possibly can, but I can't necessarily guarantee the precise timing of that, given that these negotiations are still ongoing.
Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 13(1)(b) of the EU Withdrawal Act says the vote must be on, and I quote, the negotiated withdrawal agreement. Does the Minister accept that a vote tomorrow on anything other than the negotiated withdrawal agreement does not count as the second meaningful vote and would not be the fulfilment of the Prime Minister's promise on the 26th of February that said we will hold a second meaningful vote by Tuesday, 12th of March?
Well, Minister, I reiterate to the right honourable gentleman what I've already said, that we will be holding the meaningful vote tomorrow, and of course exactly what is brought forward by the government will depend on the outcome of negotiations which are still ongoing.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the legal changes required to the withdrawal agreement, this House voted for the entire removal of the backstop. Does it not at the very least strike my honourable friend as incongruous that it is harder to leave the backstop than it is to leave the European Union under Article 50?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend, as always, makes an interesting point. I think the point being the government has heard very loudly and clearly what this House has said about its concerns about the backstop. That is what these negotiations are to address, and I'm confident and hopeful we will come forward tomorrow in a way that will allow even him to support the government's deal.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the mess that the UK government is in at this 11th hour, does the Minister think that his boss, the real Prime Minister, will ultimately be very grateful for the ruling secured by myself and other Scottish parliamentarians from the Court of Justice in Luxembourg that Article 50 can be unilaterally revoked and there is a way for the United Kingdom out of this mess?
Minister.
I'd say to the right honourable lady very simply that the way forward for the United Kingdom is to agree a deal and leave the EU with a deal.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the withdrawal agreement is defeated and this House assents to leave the EU without a deal in the votes this week, does my honourable friend agree that there are a whole series of permissions and protocols that we will need the EU's agreement to manage that situation? And why does the Minister think that the EU in those circumstances wouldn't turn around and make the obligations within the withdrawal agreement a prerequisite to agreeing any of those things that we need from them?
Well, my right honourable friend asked a very interesting hypothetical question, but I would say to him that the best thing we can do this week is to actually secure a deal, get a deal this House can support, and then get it through the House of Commons so we can avoid those eventualities and speculations.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I press the Minister on the timing of the motion for tomorrow for those of us wishing to speak in the debate? It would be particularly helpful to have the text of that motion so we know exactly what we're going to be voting on tomorrow. Could you please put it out by 5 o'clock today?
Minister.
Well, the honourable lady sets a deadline which I cannot commit to, but I will say to her that the government will bring forward that motion as soon as it can, based on the outcome of negotiations which are ongoing.
Sir Desmond Swain.
The government is formally seeking legally binding text on the Malthouse Compromise as an alternative to the backstop, isn't it?
Minister.
My honourable friend, as always, is pithy. I can confirm the government is seeking legally binding changes to address the concerns that this House has raised around the backstop.
Not the same thing. Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister needs to be very clear about the timetable, because as I understand the answers that he's given, as much as he can, he is giving a commitment on behalf of the government there'll be a meaningful vote tomorrow. But the motion will be tabled as soon as the government can, which I think means as soon as it gets all its ducks in a row. But in any event, it must be published, as far as I understand, Mr. Speaker, by the close of play this evening, which is 10:30. Does he think that that would then allow enough time, not just to consider that motion, but actually for honourable and right honourable members to table the necessary amendments to it?
And how does any opinion from the Attorney-General then fit into this very important timetable?
Minister.
Well, I said to my right honourable friend, the right honourable lady, I should say, I say to her that the Attorney General has committed to provide this House with his legal analysis of any document that is published by the UK and the EU as part of this process. He will do so ahead of the debate, and we will ensure that the government's motion is brought forward as soon as it can be. She will appreciate, though, that with negotiations ongoing, I can't commit to a specific time on that, but I take note of the Speaker's advice from the Chair.
Well, I don't think I'm offering the honourable gentleman advice, but what I can give is a very clear indication of what the procedures of this House require. It's not by way of advice. I'm telling the honourable gentleman, on behalf of the House, what the position is. The Right Honourable Lady, the member for Broxtowe, is correct in her understanding of the required deadline for the tabling of a government motion to appear on the order paper tomorrow. I understand the natural reluctance to commit to a specific time on the part of the Minister, pending the progress or otherwise of negotiations, but the deadline is the rise of the House. Insofar as the Right Honourable Lady and other honourable and right honourable members might legitimately be concerned about the matter of adequacy of time for possibly the tabling of amendments, it would perhaps be helpful to the House if I indicated that in extremis, that is to say, if circumstances require it, manuscript amendments will be taken. That is absolutely the case. I don't need any help from the Right Honourable General. He wouldn't have the slightest idea where to start. But I do know what the position is, and I'm helpfully indicating to the Right Honourable Lady what the situation is. That, I think, will help the House. Mr. Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, many questions this afternoon seem designed to construct negotiating hurdles impossible for the Prime Minister or any government to jump over. But I met lots of constituents in Gloucester over the last 3 days who want to see this issue resolved as sensibly and quickly as possible. And can I therefore give my honourable friend all encouragement for the Prime Minister to come back with those legally binding changes which will make a huge difference, particularly to the Northern Ireland situation, and then for this House, 80% of whom were elected on a manifesto to respect the referendum, to get behind the deal and see it through.
Well, Minister makes an excellent point, and all I can say to him is I hear the same thing from my constituents in Worcester as he hears from his in Gloucester.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister is asking us to accept as a Parliament that 2.5 years after the referendum, still don't know what they're doing. He is going to give us less than, well, maybe just a few hours to have a look at the deal that the Prime Minister may or may not conclude sometime overnight, so that we can have one of the most important votes that this entire Parliament will hold. That's not acceptable, is it?
I'd say to you,
Minister,
lady, I think she knows that in negotiations it is often the case that things go to the wire. That I think it's absolutely right that the government should fight for the best possible outcome to these negotiations, especially when it's been instructed to do so by this House, and that's what we're doing.
Maria Caulfield.
Speaker, would the Minister agree that the intransigence of the EU over giving legally binding changes to the backstop, whether as a time limit or an exit mechanism that would enable many of us to support the deal, justifies the concerns that those of us have about the backstop, that if we ever enter it as it stands now, the EU will never let us leave?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady expresses very clearly the concerns that have been raised across this House about the backstop, and that is absolutely why we are seeking to address them through legally binding change.
Al Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight I was supposed to be meeting the Farmers' Union of Wales in Caernarfon rather than being here. These hard-working and resourceful people battle the elements to produce the finest beef and lamb in the world, in my opinion. And when they find that something they're doing isn't working, what they do is that they change what they do. What lesson does the Minister derive for tomorrow's proceedings from their success?
Here.
Well, I'd say to the honourable gentleman that it's very important for them that we get a deal with the implementation period and the good trading terms that it can provide, and to make sure that we can continue to make Welsh lamb and beef the huge success internationally that they are.
Quite right. Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The withdrawal agreement gives certainty to the British and European citizens most affected by Brexit. It gives our businesses the certainty of a transition period. It brings certainty about the size of the bill we have to settle. Does my honourable friend agree that the one individual who is bringing uncertainty by his refusal to negotiate and compromise is in fact the leader of the party opposite?
Order. Yeah, absolutely no responsibility of the Minister. A disorderly question, an unnecessary answer, and a complete waste of everybody's time. Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government intends to publish a motion. It intends to publish an agreement, and it intends to publish the legal advice on that agreement. Can the Minister commit to ensuring that we have all of this before the beginning of the debates tomorrow? And can he also ask the Attorney-General to come and give a statement about the legal advice so that we can ask questions on it in advance of the debate tomorrow?
Well, I'd say to the honourable lady that yes, I do commit that that information will be available before the debate tomorrow, and the Attorney-General has been clear that he will publish his analysis.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is answering the questions admirably, but we have heard from the opposition benches the desire for time to look at the legal advice, time to look at the motion, time to table amendments, time to consider them. So given the opposition are requesting effectively an extension to the meaningful vote, will the Minister take from this that we perhaps should consider putting off the vote until Parliament has got time to consider what the Prime Minister brings back?
Minister, I note my honourable friend's representations, but the government is clear that we will be having the meaningful vote tomorrow.
Chris Bryant.
The thing is, there's only one possible motion that can be considered tomorrow for it to be a meaningful vote under the Act. It's very straightforward, and the government itself argued repeatedly to the Procedure Committee that if the motion had any other riders added to it, it wouldn't be legally competent. It wouldn't have any legal effect. So they could publish the motion now. I could publish the motion for them now. And for that matter, the business motion, which we'll have to have tomorrow because of the Cragg Act, also means that they could introduce that now. And then we could have proper scrutiny. Isn't it time we had some proper scrutiny and stop flying by the seat of our pants all the time?
Minister speaks about proper scrutiny, and he will know that the Prime Minister and my Secretary of State have been at this dispatch box literally hundreds of times, facing proper scrutiny on this issue. We will bring forward the government's motion for tomorrow's debate as soon as we can.
We could do it now.
Simon Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I echo the words of my honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, earlier, in saying that I wish the Prime Minister every success today. In terms of the important decisions we face this week, when will the government publish the WTO tariffs and quotas, which are going to be needed to assess the merits of no deal in the event the deal is defeated?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman makes an important point. I think it is for another department to answer, however, but we will be having a meaningful vote on a deal which ensures that we need not have those tariff barriers between ourselves and the European Union. That's one of the many reasons why I think we should support the deal.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, it will not be lost on many listening to this debate today that those who are condemning the Prime Minister for not getting a deal are the very ones who have made it difficult for her to get that deal because they've insisted she rule out no deal as an option. Could I just ask the Minister if he would give an assurance that regardless of what the Prime Minister comes back with, she will not accept the dictate of Michel Barnier on Friday, who said that the UK can leave, but the one thing that can't happen is Northern Ireland cannot leave the EU unless the EU gives its permission.
Well, I'd say very simply to the honourable gentleman, it is very clear that the UK as a whole will be leaving the European Union, and whatever the outcome of these negotiations, that will be the case. We will leave the European Union as one united kingdom.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome my Worcestershire neighbour to his place here. And I know he's an assiduous doorstep campaigner, and I wonder if his experience is the same as mine in Redditch, that people just want us to get on with this. So does he agree with me that it's really important that we do hold the vote tomorrow, so we can express the wishes of the House, and most importantly of our constituents who want us to deliver on the results of that referendum?
My friend is absolutely right. Our constituents want us to deliver the result of the referendum. They also want us to secure the strongest economy for every part of our country, from Redditch to Worcester and all around the country. We can do that by backing the deal.
Chris Leslie.
Honestly, Mr. Speaker, this is completely crazy. The Right Honourable Lady from Wallasey had this absolutely right. We're nearly 3 years on from that referendum, and yet he's maybe going to give the House, 3 minutes to consider a motion? He's shaking his head he won't give us 3 minutes, so will it be half an hour perhaps, maybe an hour? Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether my question should be to the Minister or to you, because I personally feel the House should be suspended, or at least the Government should bring forward an opportunity for the House to properly look at the motion, to properly consider any Attorney General's advice, because I, for one, want to table an amendment with my honourable friends for a people's vote so we can sort this out straight away.
Well, in responding to the Right Honourable Gentleman's question, let me be clear, as I said in my statement earlier, that the Government will be seeking to make a statement later on today.
Charlie Elfett.
Doesn't he agree that no competent negotiator would take no deal off the table? That an extension of Article 50 would simply be a bigger bridge to nowhere. And will you reject the representations from the party opposite and their fellow travellers in the TIG that we should rule out a second referendum?
Minister.
I heartily agree with my honourable friend in seeking to rule out a second referendum. I don't think it provides any solutions. All it would do is to prolong the uncertainty, and I think it's absolutely right that we should deliver on the people's vote that this House voted for and voted to respect back in 2016.
Emma Reynolds.
Speaker, can the Minister confirm that tomorrow we won't be asked to consider and vote on a unicorn motion? That is a motion that would contain a withdrawal mechanism from the backstop, unilaterally triggered by the UK, which is just wishful thinking and not agreed at EU level.
Minister.
Well, Honourable Lady, I've updated the House that negotiations are ongoing. The Government is seeking legally binding changes, and we will come forward with a meaningful vote tomorrow. I don't believe in unicorns, and neither does she. I think we should vote for a deal.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. Over the past months, I've been contacting hundreds of my local businesses in East Kilbride, Straven and Lesmahago. The message is loud and clear that they want single market and customs union. So is the Minister risking the business what businesses need from Brexit with his pursuance of the backstop? Not one of my businesses mentioned the backstop. We need to get a consensus across this House, a consensus for business and jobs and livelihoods.
Well, I'd say to the Honourable Lady, she makes an interesting point, because I agree with her to the extent that it's not businesses that traditionally raise concerns about the backstop, or perhaps not businesses in Scotland, but perhaps some businesses in Northern Ireland do. But I'd say to her, we do also have to recognise the concerns of this House. In order to get a deal and secure a deal that will secure the market access that she speaks about, we need this House to vote for it, and that needs to address the concerns of communities up and down our United Kingdom.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we were to take the Minister at his word, and I think we should, he's confirming that tomorrow this House will vote on something that is meaningful under the provisions of the EU Withdrawal Act, Section 13. Therefore, how does he think that a backbench Labour Member of Parliament standing up for his constituents in Edinburgh South will be able to place an amendment to that motion, have it signed cross-party so it's selectable, and understand the legal implications of the Attorney-General's information?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman asks a fair question, and I respect the integrity with which he does so. I think the Speaker has already indicated that he would be prepared to accept manuscript amendments. I've been clear that the Government will bring forward its motion and the Attorney-General's advice as soon as it can, and I'm sure that the Honourable Gentleman's ingenuity will allow him to pursue the ends that he means in a parliamentary way.
Stephen Timms.
Speaker, what assessment has the Minister made of what I think is an increasingly compelling case that if the Prime Minister is able to bring tomorrow or subsequently an agreement which may be acceptable to Parliament, parliamentary approval for it should be subject to ratification in a subsequent public vote?
Well, the right honourable gentleman makes a call for a subsequent public vote, a people's vote. I'm very clear that that is not something that this government would ever support.
You'd never support.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. It is often said that a lawyer who acts for himself has a fool for a client. So we're going to receive legal advice tomorrow, which hasn't yet been written because the negotiations haven't finished. So could the Minister ask for the legal advice to cover the fact that what we will be voting on tomorrow is a negotiated agreement for the purposes of Section 13(1)(b) of the Act?
Minister.
Well, I'd say to the honourable gentleman, the Attorney General has committed to publish his analysis in full.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Potentially extending Article 50 until the end of June is of course welcome, but I'm curious and a wee bit bewildered as to what dramatic change the Prime Minister expects by then, and perhaps you could enlighten us. But would it not be more honest, more courageous, more statesmanlike to abandon these futile and embarrassing attempts to hold the fractured Tory party together? Revoke Article 50 altogether and get on with the day job.
Minister.
I think it would be honest or statesmanlike to turn our back on the outcome of the referendum. I know that her party likes to ignore referendum results, but our party wants to deliver on them.
Stephen Brenner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's customary on these occasions for the House to complain that the government has sent the monkey and not the organ grinder, but on this occasion we haven't even got the monkey. We haven't even got the codpiece. But while he's enjoying his very exciting work experience day, can he confirm one thing he said earlier? He said that the Attorney General's advice would be available earlier on in his statement before the House sits tomorrow. Can he confirm that will be the case? It'll be available before the House sits and not just available before the debate.
Well, I just say for the benefit of honourable and right honourable members that the honourable gentleman's choice of language is really a matter of taste rather than of order. And I know that the right honourable gentleman, the member for Rayleigh and Wickford, will not take it in the wrong spirit if I say that whoever else might be in a position to complain about others' use of language, I think the right honourable gentleman is not on strong ground on that front. I have tended to indulge the right honourable gentleman because I know he speaks with passion and conviction. But he tends to be rather robust in his treatment of others. So all of a sudden objecting to the honourable gentleman is perhaps for someone else to do.
I was sticking up for the Minister on the government lawyers.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah, and I, as a backbencher, had a really good relationship with my whips. And I had a relationship with my whips characterised by trust and understanding. I didn't trust them, and they didn't understand me. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd say to the honourable gentleman that the Attorney General has said that he will publish his analysis, and I believe that should be before the House sits tomorrow.
Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has clearly been sent out today to defend an absolute horlicks of a situation in government. But can he confirm that, given he's already confirmed that there will be a meaningful vote tomorrow based on Section 13(1)(b) of the Act, and there won't be any unicorns contained within it, and therefore, if the government cannot negotiate some last-minute changes to the withdrawal agreement and future framework, that the meaningful vote tomorrow will take place on the existing negotiated agreement, which will not have changed.
Minister.
He asks a series of hypothetical questions. The government is negotiating. I fully expect the government to come back to this House with the results of that negotiation and then to hold the meaningful vote on those. And I hope she'll be joining me in the lobbies to secure a deal as we exit the European Union.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to gauge whether it's worth me actually bothering to turn up for the statement later on, can I confirm that the statement will outline legally binding changes to the withdrawal agreement, and also, if so, what red lines has been rubbed out to allow that to happen?
Minister.
I can say to the honourable gentleman that of course it will be worth his while to turn up to any statement from the government, and I look forward to him seeing that the changes that the government has been negotiating for have been achieved.
Thank you. Does it appertain to the exchanges that have just taken place? Oh, very well, I'll indulge the honourable gentleman. Points of order ordinarily would come later. Point of order, Mr Ian Murray.
Mr Speaker, I'm very grateful, but this pertains to the exchanges we've just had. The Minister confirmed in the answer to my question, and indeed your intervention to the member for Broxtowe, that should the Government place a motion in this House before the rise of the House, that could indeed happen at 10:29 p.m. this evening, and therefore no members of this House will be able to put amendments in the normal fashion. You suggested that the rules of the House would allow you to accept manuscript amendments. I wonder if you were able to inform the House if you would be able to accept all of the manuscript amendments that come in, how the House are able to get across-party signatures on those manuscript amendments given the timescales that are available, which give you an indication of support in the House, and what the process would be for us being able to place those between the rise of the House tonight and the opening bell tomorrow morning.
Does the right honourable gentleman want to come in on the same matter?
It's exactly further to that point of order.
Yes, indeed. I'll take the right honourable gentleman. Point of order, Mr Mark Francois.
Of course, we all know it's entirely in your gift whether or not to accept manuscript amendments. But under these very unusual circumstances, could you advise the House to give honourable members from all corners a chance to plan? Would you have some idea of some indicative deadline tomorrow by which time you'd expect those manuscript amendments to be in, so that they could be printed and circulated, so that all members of the House, as it were, would know the options on the table?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman of the right honourable gentleman for their points of order. I'm reluctant at this time to specify a deadline or an intended target time. What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is that I very much hope, with antennae finely attuned to the wishes of colleagues and the matter of basic courtesy in this place, that representatives of the executive branch, who I'm sure are keenly listening to these exchanges, will ensure that they get that motion down as soon as possible. If that is so, it may be that there is some time available tonight for colleagues interested to see what it is that the government has tabled, and then to have the advantage of that many more hours to consider whether to put down an amendment, and if so, which, and indeed to seek to garner support, possibly cross-party, for it. However, if that is not the case, we will have to adjust as best we can. And what I would say to the right honourable gentleman is that there could well be several hours tomorrow in which members will have sight of what has been tabled and will have the opportunity to table amendments. It is not to be assumed that we will necessarily be on to the business immediately after question time. There may be a longer period of time than that for colleagues to make their judgments about the matter. And certainly as far as I'm concerned, the longer time colleagues have to table amendments, if they so wish, the better. The government is perfectly entitled simply to put the motion down just before the close of business tonight, possibly obliged to do so because of what has taken place in Strasbourg, or possibly because of judgment that they have made. That's not really my concern, but my concern is that colleagues should be facilitated, and I will do on this occasion, as on every other, everything I can to facilitate the House. My role is to champion the legislature and not to be a kind of nodding donkey for the executive branch. Point of order, Mr Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Further to that point of order, the annunciator tells us that there is to be a statement on Brexit. It might be helpful to the House if you were able to confirm, if it is your understanding, that that is not necessarily going to follow sequentially upon the other statements that are going to be made, but might be quite later this evening, just because that may have a bearing on the 2 points of order that you've just...
I'm extremely grateful to the right honourable gentleman. The right honourable gentleman is right. Certainly that statement will be the last of any statements today, but the right honourable gentleman is quite right in expecting that it will not simply follow after the second statement. My understanding at the moment is that that statement would either come at the moment of interruption, which I say for the benefit of those outside the House attending our proceedings is 10 o'clock, or it might come a little earlier than that. But is it to be expected that it will automatically come straight after the second statement? No. It will come when the government is in a position to make, dare I say it, a meaningful statement to the House. A point of order, Mr. Chris Bryant.
Mr. Speaker, you understandably have been referring to the motion for tomorrow, but as I understand it, there will have to be two motions for tomorrow. There'll have to be a business of the House motion as well, because otherwise we can only have a 90-minute debate, because this will be a motion brought forward under an Act of Parliament. It would obviously be good if we were able to have that as soon as possible as well. And I just worry that we might... One of the things that is of enormous convenience to members is knowing when votes are going to happen. And I would guess that in particular people who have family commitments and things like that may want to know that the votes are going to be at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening rather than at 9 or 10 or 11 or whatever. And the sooner that is established, the better. And finally, would you just confirm that it is not your view that on the whole, much as you're prepared to take manuscript amendments, that it's not really in the best interests of Parliament to proceed on some of the most important issues affecting our country on the basis of manuscript amendments because the government has taken so much time to present its business in the proper way?
Well, on the last point first, I am happy to agree with the honourable gentleman and to confirm that it's certainly not my view that it's desirable to proceed on the basis of manuscript amendments. It is far preferable that colleagues should have plenty of time in which to table amendments in the usual way. If, however, that proves not to be possible, I have to adjust, and it is obviously much more popular with members of the House if I say, yes, I will consider manuscript amendments than if I simply preclude them from consideration. As far as the motion singular or motion plural is concerned, I think the honourable gentleman, as usual, is right. There will need to be two motions. There will need... No, I'm grateful, always helpful to have the ballast of endorsement from the sedentary position of the right honourable gentleman, member for Rayleigh and Whitford. I can't count on it at all times, and therefore, when I have it, I should put it in the bank and earn interest on it. And yes, there will need to be two motions. There will need to be a business of the House motion and a substantive motion relating to the withdrawal agreement. It would be helpful to know earlier rather than later. At this stage, I don't know whether the government is thinking in terms of a protected time, that is to say a guaranteed number of hours irrespective of when we start, or whether they're thinking in terms of a conclusion of the debate at 7 o'clock and votes immediately thereafter. Again, I think it would be helpful to know earlier rather than later. And of course, it's perfectly possible and highly desirable that in the statement tonight, either the honourable gentleman, if he's delivering that statement, or more likely perhaps the Secretary of State for Brexit, makes that clear, and that will then satisfy the curiosity not only of the honourable gentleman, but the interest of a great many other members besides. I will come to... I'm saving her. Point of order, Mr. Kevin Brennan.
As I've understood it, Mr. Speaker, further that point of order, our system is based on cabinet government. Is it the case that what we've heard now means that the government will be laying a motion which it's inviting amendments to from members of this House, which will be about the most important decision we've taken since the Second World War, and which will not even have been considered by the Cabinet?
Well, I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman. I think that is, I won't say above or below my pay grade, but on a different remuneration scale. Let me put it like that. Because, as the honourable gentleman knows, I know he served with very considerable distinction as a minister in the past. In fact, I remember beetling over to his ministerial office on one occasion in years gone by, and he was a figure of considerable celebrity in the then government, I understand. I've never been a minister, still less a member of the Cabinet. Quite how the Cabinet operates, when it meets, what is discussed, I have no way of knowing. So whether the Cabinet will have met to discuss this matter, I don't know. But what I can say to the honourable gentleman is that whatever motions are tabled, they will be tabled in the name, and therefore with the authority, and by implication with the full agreement, implicit if not explicit, of the government. Point of order, Yvette Cooper.
Mr Speaker, on the government's website at the moment, there is a month-long consultation on door closure warnings on the DLR. So there is now currently more consultation on door closure warnings than there is on the entire future of our country and what is going to happen on Brexit. Doesn't he think that the government is being utterly irresponsible and reckless? Is this incompetence or is this just contempt for Parliament?
Well, I don't particularly want to get into the matter of contempt. I will come to the Honourable Lady. We have had the matter of contempt raised previously, and of course there was a motion passed by the House on that matter at an earlier time. I don't want to get into that today. Suffice it to say, I hear what the Right Honourable Lady says. I do think it is important that we treat of this business in a responsible way. And part of treating it in a responsible way means ensuring that colleagues, parliamentary colleagues, and very importantly backbenchers, have the opportunity to express their will, both in written and spoken form as well as by vote. So I don't want to reach a premature judgment. Let's keep an eye on this as the day unfolds. But however the government makes its own decisions, which is obviously not a matter for me, the way in which the House disposes of business is ultimately a matter for us all, and that must meet a proper test. We must not be messed around. I'm sure that isn't the will of the Honourable Gentleman, who is a most courteous fellow, but we cannot allow that to happen. And I hope the Right Honourable Lady, with whom I've cooperated closely on parliamentary matters over the last 9.5 years of my speakership, will accept that I will always try to do what is right by the House of Commons, and I give my commitment to ensure that I do so again. Point of order. Yes, of course. I will come to the Honourable Lady. I did say I'd take the Honourable Lady. Point of order, Kirsty Blackman, and then...
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, during my time in Parliament, I'm not aware of any point at which the statements have not come one after the other, if you see what I mean. So my understanding is that we now have an urgent question and then we have 3 statements. The first 2, you've said, are going to come straight after the urgent question. The third of those might not come immediately after the statements, if I'm to understand what you said earlier. How will it be communicated to members at what point in time that is likely to come? Is it possible it will come in the middle of the debate that's taking place on the FGM bill, or will it come either before or after that, and when will we know and how will we find out?
The answer is it could potentially come at any time with the agreement of the Chair. I don't seek to minimise the significance of the Honourable Lady's point. However, there are precedents for most things in this House. I can assure the Honourable Lady there are certainly precedents for statements being delivered at the moment of interruption. There are many such precedents, and so it's perfectly possible to have a statement that is not taken sequentially after the others, but at the moment of interruption, in the case of a Monday, 10 o'clock. So it could be at 10 o'clock. It might, however, be pursuant to what the Honourable Gentleman Member for Rhondda was saying about people with external commitments and needing to honour those commitments. It might be for the convenience of the House, if the Minister is ready to deliver that statement, for it to be delivered to the House earlier than 10 o'clock. And if I had a sort of sense that it would be for the convenience of the House, I would be minded to acquiesce in such a request, or to agree to such a request. How would it become known to members? My strong advice to the Honourable Lady and to all colleagues is to keep their eyes on the enunciator. And we will try to ensure that there is proper notice. It won't be at 5 minutes' notice or anything like that. There will be proper notice, and on that I myself, I can assure the Honourable Lady, will insist. I will insist on that. Point of order, Mr Peter Bone.
Mr Speaker, I am concerned, I think, like other members, that we have enough time to see what the motion is, to table amendments and to consider the amendments before we debate and vote on the issue. You said, sir, earlier on that it might be that there would be some time after questions before the debate. Were you indicating that there might be statement or urgent questions, or was there something else in your mind?
Business motion. No, I wasn't thinking of one thing rather than another, but it is perfectly possible that there could be urgent questions, as urgent question applications, as colleagues know, are very common in the House. They're very commonly submitted, and they're very commonly granted by me if I think that they warrant the attention of the House. So it's perfectly possible there will be urgent questions, perfectly possible there might be ministerial statements, and it is even conceivable, I don't say for certain, but depending on what happens at this very important time, there could be a request to secure the attention of the House on another matter for a significant period before we would even get to that debate. And that is perfectly possible. The standing orders allow for it. So, I don't think the honourable gentleman, I understand how conscientious he is, should be unduly concerned that there will simply be no time to consider what has been put down. There will be time, all right. Point of order, Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those of us who find the palpitations are starting in relation to the week ahead of us, could I ask, that words like "as the day unfolds" is quite inducing of panic in some members, even those who don't have an executive role. But could I ask, is there a precedent on such an important matter that members are not being given 24 hours just to plan, to discuss points of common interest amongst others from other benches and so on? Is there a precedent of this sort of decision-making?
The answer to the honourable lady, I'm sorry if she's concerned, and I don't cavil at that. These are very important times for all of us. Almost certainly there will be a precedent, for the reason I gave to the honourable lady from the Scottish National Party a few moments ago. There are precedents for most things in this House. If the honourable lady is challenging me as to when there's a precise precedent, I admit I can't. In fact, there won't be a precise precedent because the particular circumstances of Brexit are a little different from anything else that has previously occurred. But if she's wondering whether there has ever been such a situation, the answer is that there will be precedents in the past. And what I'm trying to do is to ensure that there is maximum time for those who care about these matters, and I think a lot of members do care about these matters and may potentially have an interest in tabling an amendment and so on, and their interests will be protected by the Chair as effectively as I can possibly do. And if there are no further points of order, we come now, and I thank colleagues for their interest and hope to keep them updated. We come now to the urgent question. Diane Abbott.
To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department to make a statement on Shamima Begum, the death of her son Jarrah, and other cases.
The Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Sajid Javid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we estimate that over 900 people left the UK to engage with the conflict in Syria and Iraq. Many have been killed fighting, some remain there, some have returned, others could still come back. Some irresponsibly took young British children with them. Some had children whilst they were there as part of their mission to expand the so-called caliphate. We have made it very clear since 2011 that no British citizen should travel to Syria. Those who have stayed until the bitter end include some of the most devoted supporters of Daesh. One of the ways we can deal with the threat that they pose to the UK is to remove British citizenship from those holding another nationality. Since 2010, this power has been applied to around 150 people of a range of nationalities. Mr. Speaker, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on the details of an individual case, although clearly the loss of any child is a tragedy. But if I may, I will address some of the issues that have been raised. First, these decisions are made very carefully. Where citizenship deprivation is being considered due to national security concerns, decisions are based on advice and intelligence from the security services, from counter-terrorism police, and specialist security and legal officials in the Home Office. When people dedicated to keeping our country safe give an informed recommendation, any Home Secretary should listen very carefully. Second, we are unable to provide support to British nationals within Syria as the UK government does not have a consular presence there. Third, the status of a child does not change if their parents' British citizenship is subsequently revoked. Mr. Speaker, there are no easy answers. I must also think about future conflicts and the precedents that we set. I don't want any more children brought into a war zone because their parents think that they will automatically be bailed out no matter what the risk. But the UK is doing all we can to help innocent people caught up in this conflict. We have committed £2.8 billion to Syria since 2012, our largest ever response to a single humanitarian crisis, and we are on track to resettle 20,000 vulnerable refugees who have fled the country, with our national resettlement programmes resettling more than any other EU member state in 2017. Of course, I understand the public interest, so I've asked my officials to expedite the publication of our next transparency report on disruptive and investigatory powers, including the most up-to-date annual figures on the deprivation of citizenship. This government remains committed to protecting our citizens around the world, but I will not shy away from using my powers, those powers at my disposal, to protect this country.
Diane Abbott.
When she was 15, Shamima Begum made a very bad decision. And it is arguable that much of the tragedy that has engulfed her since then flows from that decision. It is also the case that she has in recent times made some reprehensible statements in the media. But the Home Secretary will be aware that on this side of the House, we believe that she and her baby should have been allowed to return home. Now we know that baby is dead. We believe she should have been allowed to return home because this schoolgirl, born and brought up in Bethnal Green, was Britain's responsibility. And as it happens, this is the general view of the President of the United States. But above all, bringing the mother and baby home would also have given the baby a chance of life. Instead, the Home Secretary, in the face of a media outcry, chose to strip Shamima of her citizenship. The Home Secretary will be aware that many authorities contend it was done illegally because she was not a dual national. I can only repeat Article 15 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has a right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of their nationality. Does the Home Secretary accept that the child was British? Does he further accept that the British legal system does not hold children responsible for the wrongdoing of their parents? Does he also accept that, despite what ministers have said about the dangers of sending officials into the refugee camps, aid workers, doctors and journalists go backward and forward into these camps all the time? Does he further accept that by stripping Shamima of her nationality, he made it impossible for her to fulfil her duties as a mother and bring her baby home to a safe place? And can he confirm, as he said earlier, that as well as taking legal advice, he also took advice from the police and the security services about desirability or otherwise of bringing Shamima home? Can he explain to the House why he deemed this 19-year-old girl with her not-quite-3-week-old baby more dangerous to Britain than the hundreds of foreign fighters that have already been allowed to return? We now know that there are other British women in these camps who've been stripped of their nationality by his predecessor as Home Secretary, the member for Hastings and Rye. Can he give the House an assurance that he will work with the Foreign Commonwealth Office to see how best these British children's rights can be protected? His decision in this case has caused widespread concern and alarm. We understand the issue of keeping British people safe, but this was a British baby who is now dead. And I put it to the Home Secretary. Nobody on this side of the House condones.
What did he do? Stupid man.
Yeah.
Order. Mr Wallace, please, I respect your governmental responsibilities and the seriousness with which you take them, but I do appeal to you just to listen to the exchanges. You can always look wise, that's not very difficult for you, but it's best for you just to listen. And as to the order, as to the PPS sitting behind you, Mr Hoare, you're a junior member of the House, trying to come to terms with your responsibilities as a parliamentary private secretary. Your role is just to sit there and to nod or shake your head in the appropriate place. That is your role. That is your responsibility. It's not for you to sit there giving a running commentary on the performance of the Shadow Home Secretary. I have not the slightest interest in what you have to say, and you will say no more in the course of these exchanges. I shall have to ask you to relocate yourself. Diane Abbott.
Hear, hear. This is a very serious matter, and it's unfortunate that the Treasury bench don't seem to take it with the seriousness that it deserves. And let me say to the Home Secretary, finally, nobody on this side of the House condones what Shamima Begum did, the choices she made, the things she said. But does the Home Secretary accept that if it was his 19-year-old daughter, however badly she'd behaved, however reprehensible or near criminal her choices, would he want her to bury 3 babies in the course of a year? The Home Secretary has a responsibility, of course, to protect the British public, but he also has a responsibility to appear just and fair in the eyes of the British public. And this decision, which has led as night follows day to this less than 3-week-old baby dying, does not appear just or fair to the majority of the British public.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, first of all, one thing I will concur with the Right Honourable Lady. Of course, the death of any child is a tragedy, wherever that takes place in the world, and it's not something that anyone would want to see any member of this House. This government is committed to protecting British citizens, but it is very different when it comes to a war zone where there is no consular presence. That is a fact, not just under this government. It has been factual under successive governments, and it's true for many